Saturday, July 13th, 2019. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that I actually do out here when I visit, making my observations, let's say, on areas that seem to be more prone to paranormal activity, as they say, things like that. And one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about was I don't want people to get the wrong impression. Like the cell phone tower incident with the EVP on the path. I'm not saying things like that's the sole reason why this is occurring or things like that. I'm just making observations. And I'll go into some other stuff later on about the path and those effects. Um, but that's really like a small topic compared to what's coming up next. I just want to make it clear that I'm just making observations, and it may go somewhere, it may go nowhere. It may seem like something, it may have nothing to do with whatever is related to what we're investigating. It's just like kind of like the raw science deal. Uh, Natural explanations for things kind of stuff. And maybe going down that road of investigating natural phenomena, it could lead us as to why we're getting stuff that is clearly not natural, such as EVPs, where you ask a question and you get a straight, clear, loud answer. Um, I'm a geology kind of guy. I love, let's say, earthquakes. When I was spending some time in Nevada, apparently that's more seismically active than California. On sometimes a daily basis, I would feel tremors in the ground. It would shake me on the couch and stuff like that. Really cool stuff. Um, but I only spent about 2 years doing that. And I would see methane coming out of the lakes and the streams, and we're talking like a whole lot of it, a lot of gas bubbles coming up. Cool stuff. Well, when I came back to Illinois, spending a lot of time at the Grove, um, and occasionally in Illinois before that, I would feel like little tremors. Maybe a lot of other people have. But when I was here for many hours, I started realizing, like, wow, instead of just feeling one every so many months here, I was feeling them every week. What's going on underground? Actually, the spot where I'm at right now, I was actually laying down on the ground here in the middle of the woods, just relaxing, just looking up at the trees, and suddenly a loud, well, not loud, but physically a big jolt from underground, like almost like an explosion. It just jolted my whole body. And which actually, there's a graph I can present to actually show this pulse that was detected on a seismograph nearby. The point is, I was feeling these really big jolts quite frequently. And I noticed at the pond, especially on this one day, you get your typical, it's probably methane, where you get these little trickles of bubbles, and then you get your steady stream, but it's just like a small steady stream. And sometimes I hang out at the pond, just watch the streams come up, and just, amuse myself. But on this one day, I was looking, and at the center of the pond, there was a big disturbance. I mean, it was like, it gave the effect like the pond was boiling. There was just all these waves, all these bubbles coming up, and it was like a 20-foot spread, um, oval, whatever you want to call it, and it was just so much. I thought I actually got some video of that, but I'll have to go back and look. I mean, if you want to take my word for it, it was happening, right? But in this one shot this past winter, in December, I believe it was, I wanted to go out by the lake or the pond because it was supposed to be frozen over. It was a little sketchy at first. I'm like, I don't know if I want to go out there, but I noticed that there were all these air bubbles trapped underneath the ice. Now, occasionally you see it, but this was quite a bit, and it's within the time frame of 2018 when we were getting a lot of tremors. At least I was feeling a lot of tremors out here. And I mean, even parts of the cemetery, the ground was extremely soft. And it actually went back to like 2017. I mean, I'd be walking, and you feel like you're sinking, like something fluffed up the ground. So I'm assuming it has to do with these gases and stuff, right? But here's the really cool part, the really cool one. And I kept it semi-secret for a while, but now I can talk about it. I was walking in the cemetery one day, and the ground was constantly vibrating, constantly shaking. It wasn't stopping. Like, oh damn, what's going down underground here? Like, and I'm walking by the pine style trees off to the right as you come in, and it's just a little stronger. So I put my hand against the tree, And I could just feel this tree just totally vibrating, and then it would come in waves too. Then it would stop and like a little bit and get, vibrate loud, more, and then get soft and more and then soft. Wow, what's going on down there? And I just kind of walked away, and at a certain point, this is what blew my mind. I turn and I look back over at that tree, and there was this flash. I'm like, did I just see that? And then there was another flash of light come from the tree. And then suddenly the tree, like mostly green, maybe a little blue, the thing was glowing like a lantern. I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. What is that? Now there's gotta be a relationship there, right? Shaking, vibration, now we got these weird lights. I could talk probably for hours on this kind of stuff, but there's a reason why I'm making this video. So as of last weekend, a couple of women were out here, and I'll speak with them probably for a good hour or so. And hello, apparently you watch the YouTube videos and on Facebook and stuff like that. So shout out to the two ladies that experienced the shakingness of this very same tree, and they said they felt it in their feet at one point as well. So this is kind of common. It's not your imagination. We're getting a lot of weird tremors, and now we have these weird lights. And then it occurred to me, I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah, people talk about earthquake lights. I wasn't that heavy into it or anything like that. It's just really, brief stuff. Now I got a little heavy into it and started to study it. And apparently, based on their theory, at least one person's theory that is gained some traction, I guess you could say, was kind of paralleling what I was coming up with, which was why were we getting this electric charge in the area? It's so hard to explain, but basically there was this like electric charge scenario that I kept observing, like a lot of ionization or whatnot. It's a combination of things. I'm like, wow, I had no instrumentation to really measure this stuff, but there's other ways to figure out that there's this availability. And according to this theory on the earthquake lights, there is this release of this energy that comes from the ground. I'll add a clip in after this, or maybe link to a full video on it. You'll be very fascinated by this stuff. So when you see a tree glowing, you'd think it'd be paranormal, but no, it's just a side effect of something. So studying the paranormal activity out here at the Grove, I knew that something seemed to have like this dance. There was a side effect. There was an availability of something, this, that, and the other thing, that was probably causing some of this other stuff. Let's wait for the plane to go by. Okay, kind of went by. But don't let this kind of stuff disappoint you. Like, not everything has a natural explanation, so to speak. Like, not all these lights you're seeing out here are just probably a natural phenomena, because some of it appears to interact with you. It's kind of strange. But on the other hand, to see during 2018, I told you there was these really, really bright lights being flashed around the cemetery, brighter than a camera flash. Some would think it's, spirits and ghosts. And, I was trying to approach this from a raw science perspective, based on just observation. Like, what is there's got to be some energy involved, obviously, to see these flashes. And apparently, in some of the material on earthquake lights, we get some of these effects. So don't be disappointed if some of this is natural. But it could also just be a clue. It could be a clue as to other effects going on out here, such as disappearing objects, cars, houses, people, things grabbing you, touching you, talking to you out loud. Some of it you get recorded, so on and so forth. Obviously, that's not some simple earthquake, seismic activity going on. But there's something so interesting about all this. The availability of the rock, the bedrock, on the surface level here, near the cemetery. When you go back and eventually watch this footage of this girl talking with the front of the behind the NASA podium there, about how this energy gets released from the earth and whatnot, from these rocks. I mean, there's got to be a clue here, right, folks? Little stuff. I mean, I'm barely even touching on anything I really want to talk about. I'm just kind of throwing this stuff out there. Please, if there's like seismologists, geologists watching these videos, please chime in with something, because I do want to install at least some seismic equipment. I would prefer it to be out here in the forest preserves, but that's not going to be logistically possible. If you live in the area of the Grove and you're willing to donate a little space to bury something under your yard, get in touch with me. I would like to start a small project of at least 24-hour day monitoring of the seismic activity, just for something to study. You might be surprised at what's going on beneath your own feet where you live. Anyway, I'm going to cut to some of this footage I was talking about with the lady behind the podium, and I suggest that you go and watch the full version. It's almost becoming, in my eyes, like required reading, required viewing. Cicadas have come back. Anyway, have fun and enjoy your journey to the Grove.
And not all situations are going to produce earthquake lights or related precursors of any kind. So it seems to be that these kind of precursors are an exception rather than a rule if they occur at all. And mechanisms, we have not come up with an explanation for how they could occur. We don't have a framework to hang these observations onto to make a coherent theory. And I'll talk about these mechanisms that have been proposed next. And then we have this association with spooky things, paranormal, and I'll get to that, but that makes scientists very wary. So traditional research in seismology has been focused on the mechanical observations, the ground deformation, the prior events, and these reported precursors are very diverse and they're hard to fathom. They could all be caused by the same thing. And what I found interesting was the tone of the researchers who are working on earthquake lights. You know, in 1931, there were these 1,500 reports, and some said at the time, 1931, there's no doubt these things exist. There we are in 1973, John Durr, USGS, called them well established in his paper based on the many documented reports. Here we are in 2018, and we're still not sure if they're well established or if they really exist. So not everyone seems convinced, and if we ask the USGS what their opinion is, they say geophysicists differ on the extent to which they think individual reports of unusual lighting near the time and epicenter of an earthquake actually represent earthquake lights. Some doubt that any of the reports constitute solid evidence, whereas others think that at least some reports plausibly correspond. So it's very wish-washy. We have to have a mechanism to concentrate and maintain large charge densities to reach the surface to make these lights. Charge accumulation and movement is the problem. But squeezing and grinding and breaking rock slabs and mineral grains on such a scale, it would be surprising if you didn't get something electrical going on. So let's take a look at some of the mechanisms proposed. How do we get that electrical effect to the surface? If we can confirm that movement to the surface, then maybe we have a basis for the reports, and then they'll be more accepted. So an electrical mechanism might produce air ionization, electrically charged particles that act as nuclei for condensation, release the latent heat, and may have physical effects on animals and the spooky things like the demagnetized magnets. So streaming potential, where fluids are forced through small pathways that generates electrical charges, not high voltage, no way to get it to the surface. The most popular explanation used is piezoelectricity, but this has short decay and you have positive and negative charges being formed at the same time. If you have random distribution of quartz crystals, quartz is abundant, but the charges will cancel each other out. And we can't get it, again, can't get it to the surface. Vaporization in shear zones produce charge separation and dramatically increase conductivity, but only if they're shallow can they travel all the way to the surface to produce a coronal discharge above the faults. So several geophysical factors at play here break this mechanism. And sonoluminescence also proposed. That's when an intense sound wave can cause gas bubbles in a liquid to collapse, produce this burst of light. This idea also didn't go very far. So all these things could be going on, maybe are going on, but they don't seem to be enough to produce what is observed as earthquake lights on a large scale. Now we have the best candidate for a mechanism, the peroxy defect theory. Friedemann Freund has been the discoverer and champion of this unifying theory, and he's combining ideas from semiconductor physics, chemistry, rock physics, into the idea of this peroxy defect theory. And he got to this via the semiconductor physics. He is not a seismologist, but all of a sudden he was getting this charge coming from his rocks, and he wondered if it was actually doing something in real life. So I'll briefly explain the peroxy defect theory. Bear with me on this. I'm going to go very fast. So the oxygen molecule is O2. It's negatively charged. It's typically linked with other minerals like silica and aluminum. So the peroxy defect is when the O2 in the mineral structure is replaced by an OO bond, which is very weak. But it's stable. It sits there dormant, but it is easily split. And these peroxy defects are in igneous and metamorphic rocks. So there's a percentage of this distribution in these rocks. Not so much in, I don't think they find it at all in carbonates or marble, but in the igneous and metamorphic rocks they do. So under stress, these bonds break and they release a positive charge carrier. It's called positive holes or P holes, which flow, the positive charges flow via grain to grain contact, and they flow fast, 200 meters per second and several kilometers if the chemistry allows. So you have this cloud of charged particles that can reach the surface and generate this local electrical field and could cause this massive air ionization. Now, Freund says that this is what generates the necessary charge for observed earthquake lights effects and associated phenomenon. And he's demonstrated this in the lab and reports that at about 2 seconds before rock failure, he records a burst of positive ions from the surface. Now he uses stress gradients, so he'll stress the rock on one side and that creates the gradient to flow. It's not uniform loading. So if you imagine like, okay, you've got a fault and there's a stress on the fault, the charge carriers are moving away from that stress. And maybe topography plays a role. The flow is away from the fault, and notably, he says the discharge may be concentrated at these high points on the mountains or asperities, rough points. And we know that pointed and irregular structures tend to concentrate that electrical field in the air. That's why you see St. Elmo's fire on the top of ships' masts in the old days. And from what I can tell, and I'm definitely not an expert in this, peroxies do not seem to be relatively controversial. Nobody's saying that they don't exist. It's how you translate it over to the idea of seismology and earthquake lights is where we get kind of lost. So Freund has a problem with scaling up. You know, he's doing these lab experiments. Is it really equivalent to what's going on underground? We don't know. But if this theory does hold, it could account for these lights of various kinds and the timing and the clouds or the fogs and the thermal infrared anomalies and the ionospheric perturbations and the animal behavior and even the everyday strange anomalies, because this cloud of electrically charged particles are leaving the ground surface en masse. So here's a simplified model of the subduction zone on the left and the Graben area on the right. Activation of the electronic charges via the mechanical stresses. S, the stressor, is the moving fault. We have the breaking of the peroxy bonds, the formation of currents, and the positive charge exiting at the surface, producing electric ground potential, infrared emission, air ionization, and increased ozone. And if you recall, the most significant electrical signal, he says, is seen before reaching rock failure, so just seconds before a quake. That does correlate with reported earthquake lights. And he also suspects that a passage of a shear wave, that energy may also produce enough force to break those peroxy bonds and manifest that energy at the surface. Dalier's event? Maybe. And unfortunately, the charge flow could be focused in some areas, blocked in other areas due to the heterogeneity of the crust. But it is the most promising method proposed so far, but it's still just proposed. And Dr. Freund and his colleagues are having a difficult time getting a footing with many of today's seismologists.